Hello, everybody. A warm welcome to Wisdom from North, the Nordic platform for spiritual growth and personal development. I'm Jannica, and if you're new to my channel, as always, welcome here. I'd love for you to subscribe, and you do that below. And if you click the bell, you get notifications of my new videos. Today, I'm really excited about being here with Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy. Anna offers programs and online courses on how to heal your childhood PTSD. She also has a very popular YouTube channel where she offers practical advice on how to cope and handle your childhood PTSD. And I'm really excited about hearing Anna's perspectives today. So let's meet her.
Hi, Jannica. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Very nice.
So nice to have you here. And I got to say, Anna, that I have been taking one of your courses because I discovered you online. And you talked about childhood PTSD, which was a bit new to me. I knew about PTSD, but not childhood PTSD. And I found myself wondering, is this something I have? And I wasn't sure, but I was curious enough to take your program, and I find it really deep and profound and really interesting, your angle, and also coming from, not being a doctor, not being like a therapist, but someone who has really experienced it herself and found strategies that are working for you. And I'd love to hear more about your story later, but for everyone who are a bit unsure what we're talking about here, can you define in your words, what is childhood PTSD? And sort of if there's a difference between PTSD and childhood PTSD.
Childhood PTSD is a common colloquial name for it. Like the real word for it is complex PTSD. And complex PTSD is different from regular old PTSD. The regular kind is one we all heard about maybe in the 1980s when clinical professionals started to realize that soldiers were coming home from war, like really messed up, having nightmares, and what they used to call shell shock, maybe in World War II, World War I. But PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was a word given because they realized it had a common pattern, and they have struggled since then for how to treat people who have it. They medicate, they do therapy, but more and more, there was more research coming out that it's a neurological injury, and you can begin to heal it with neurological tools. And that knowledge that it's not just in your mind, it's not just psychological, that there's a brain problem going on, sort of emerged at the same time as they began to recognize there's another kind of PTSD. And rather than it coming from, an adult being exposed to a terrible thing, like a combat in a battle, in a war, this would be from stuff that went on for a long period of time. And that could be like living in a war zone. It could be having terrible medical problems all your life, but most often it's from having a crappy childhood, from abuse and neglect in childhood. So complex PTSD, it's called CPTSD, but I call it childhood PTSD because that's who I'm talking to, the people like me who have so many things going for us, but as kids were abused and neglected and have been haunted by the symptoms of that all their lives. And we were told, oh, I see you keep making bad choices in your life, bad relationships. That's something a lot of us have done, including me. And and they go, you're just trying to recreate your childhood. And I remember thinking when I was in my first therapy session ever, and when I was 21 years old, I'm just like, of course I'm not trying to recreate my childhood. It was terrible. I'm trying to have something much better. And I've been on this quest to recover myself the whole time. And I was able to find all these tools that came together, but it didn't all come together till there was a name given to what we have, complex PTSD. And now we know, with that brain injury, for example, just to take one symptom of CPTSD, and I'll name them all off in a minute, but let's say somebody keeps going for people who are abusive or unavailable. What if there's a brain thing that happens under stress that makes it very hard to reason and think? And what if there's an attachment wound that makes it too easy to rush into a relationship, and at the same time an abandonment wound that makes it impossible to leave? these were the pieces of the puzzle for me that made me go, oh, I have a brain thing. And if I could heal that brain thing, at least in those moments when I'm deciding whether or not to get in a relationship, maybe things could be different for me. And that's how Crappy Childhood Fairy really got its start, was when there was a name and I knew that it was a brain thing and that had to be healed first. And I was able to recover very quickly once I knew that. And I've been turning around and teaching people everything I learned.
Wow, I love that you're doing that. And I love the name. I'm gonna be honest. It's brilliant. How can we know whether we have it? Because perhaps we have some symptoms, but not all of them. For example, with me, I don't feel like I've had a crappy childhood. So I feel like I'm a bit in between. There wasn't any physical abuse. I didn't feel there was neglect, but still I have a lot of the symptoms, or especially have had a lot of the symptoms. And I bet there are many like me who are like, I'm unsure. So I'd love for us to learn a bit about the symptoms and then how we can figure out whether this applies to us.
Yeah. So typical symptoms of complex PTSD, there are some that are behavioral, some that are neurological, and some that are emotional. So the behavioral ones are pretty well known because you can see them from the outside: depression, anxiety, difficulty focusing and concentrating, tendency to get into relationships that have a lot of arguing or even violence, tendency to be violent, getting into a lot of conflict, things like that. So a lot of times, like, the common culture has sort of looked at people like that, and of course, addiction, alcoholism and addiction. We've looked at people like that and we've sort of said, well, they probably had a lot of trauma. That may be what's going on. But then this science came out in the 90s from some researchers in the US who they started with this question about a weight clinic. They were running this clinic with women who had a great deal of weight they were carrying on their bodies and were trying to lose 100, 200 pounds. And the women would get very close to the weight they wanted, and then something would happen very quietly and they would gain it all back. And so the researchers were trying to understand that. So they asked those women 1,000 different questions to try to, see if they could find out what's going on. And they didn't really, everything was just sort of random except this one question. And it was, were you ever sexually abused as a child? And 80% of the women who had that extra weight had been sexually abused, 80%. So unfortunately, they then, trusted their own interpretation so much as people who don't have CPTSD. And they said, oh, well, they must be avoiding sex and they don't want to be sexual. But see, when I came along, I've been challenging things like that. Is that true? It might be true for some people, but is that really what's true for everybody who's sexually abused or overweight? I didn't think so. We now know that there are endocrine changes, that if you were to be sexually abused as a child, it would change your hormones for life. And it would change, in particular, some of the ones that are relevant to weight are insulin and leptin. And those can be very severely disrupted. So it doesn't matter what you eat, you could be thrown into insatiable hunger and craving. And that would be driving the overweight, not some psychological self-destructive motive. Now, we do have, self-destructive motives sometimes, but it's not across the board. I just kept noticing there were a lot of these big judgmental things. You're trying to recreate your childhood, or I used to smoke heavily. Oh, you really want to die. Actually, you know what? I can tell you now about my smoking addiction, which thankfully is all gone now. Smoking regulated my brain. Smoking helped me come out of PTSD and focus and kind of get myself together and off to work. I smoked like 2 packs a day, so it was a high price to pay to get my brain together. And now I have better tools. But I think that's a lot of what's going on. We're actually trying to be successfsome in our lives, but we're just using anything that seems to help. So sometimes it's an addiction. And of course, there are psychological problems. But some of the physical problems that we now know are associated with trauma, they created this thing called the ACE survey. And it's now, people now look at it like a very primitive tool. It asks 10 questions. Were you physically abused? Were you sexually abused? Did you see your dad hit your mom? It was all very narrow. There could be so many ways you could be traumatized as a kid, and It left out, like, what if your parent died? What if you were targeted by racist bullies? You know, there were things like that that could be quite severe and cause PTSD or complex PTSD. They're not there, but in any case, they listed 10 common things, and they found that every one of those things that you said yes to increased your chances by like 20% of having an autoimmune disorder, like one type of diabetes and multiple sclerosis, lupus. I have Graves' disease, a thyroid thing. I have vitiligo, which is where the pigment goes away. Those are autoimmune diseases, quite possibly linked to trauma. Who knows? Probably. And that the chances go way up of those. And if and then they also, so research continued, and then they were like, what is the mechanism of these things? And it's not perfectly understood yet, but it has something to do with neurological dysregulation. So neurology, keep in mind, like neurology governs everything about you, really. It's governing your thoughts, it's governing your hormones, your movements, your muscle tones, your feelings. Like your brain and your spine are so much a part of who you are, you know, as a being and as a body. There's so much of who you are. So what happens, this is what I can tell you so far as I understand it. When we were kids, we had to come up with a coping mechanism to deal with terrible things going on. One thing that happened to me, for example, my parents used to get violent with each other, and I had a baby sister, and I would grab her out of her crib and pull her into a little kitchen cupboard. And we would hide in there with the door closed till it got quiet out there. We would do that. I think the moments like that, or my mom, she was an alcoholic. She would take me, she'd go, I'm just going to go inside this casino for 1 minute. Just wait for me outside for 1 minute. I'll be right back. I just need to play a couple of dollars. And then she'd just go away for hours. So when I was like 6 years old. So that kind of thing happened. And when I think about when did I get PTSD, those would be likely experiences. So what did I have to do to cope with that? I would think a little 6-year-old girl has to go, it's okay, I can get through this, this isn't happening, I've got this, I can do it. And I'm so thankful, like that's how our spirits protect us. But there comes a day you grow up, and if you're still living your life like, I don't see the problem, I don't recognize dangerous people, I can tolerate anything, you're sabotaging your own life, you're putting yourself in a terrible situation. But by then it's a brain thing. It's wired in now as a response. And so I used to go to therapy. I went to 8 different therapists. I would get worse and worse. The more therapy I did, the sicker I got.
But I read that, and I heard you said that you
Yeah.
get worse by therapy. That does make sense to me, and that you got even more depressed. How come?
Yeah.
Were there lousy therapists, or
no? They were good, dear people, very educated and accomplished. But talk therapy is just one way of helping people. And for people who are dysregulated, talking about what happened, and that's always what they ask you. You know, you start with a new therapist. So what happened? And you go, well, when I was a kid, my mom, everything I just told you, my mom was an alcoholic. She used to leave me in the snow, you know. I would talk about that stuff, and I would start to get dysregulated. So dysregulated, there's an aspect of it that we can feel, and you might feel like discombobulated. I don't know if you have that in Norwegian, if there's a word for that, where you're just clumsy and like, you know, you feel numb, clumsy, you keep getting lost, you can't remember what you were saying, you drop your cup of coffee, nothing, you know, everything just feels wrong. And so that is what dysregulation can feel like. But it can also feel like you misunderstand reality and it feels much worse than it is. And you get very upset or angry about something, but too much, you know, it's not, we all see other people do it, and you can tell when it's too big a response, but in ourselves, it all feels real. We're just responding to our emotions, but we're emotionally dysregulated. The emotions are just kind of, boom, they're going too high. Or sometimes.
So just regulation, just to understand that is a consequence of the CPTSD, and that happens sometimes all of a sudden when you are triggered, for instance, that you sort of get out of balance. Is that okay?
Yeah. And you don't always even know what your triggers are. Like they can be so subtle. I can wake up triggered. I can wake up it's called an emotional flashback. where life just looks terrible to me. And I have this, like, my emotional flashback thinking is, I have to do everything. No one's going to help me. I have to do everything. And I'm so angry and I'm in a bad mood. And my husband, he can tell when I'm doing it now. And he'd just be like, do you maybe need to use your tools before we talk? And then I will help you. You probably want some help, right? I will help you, but could you use your tools first? Because I used to just wake up and go, well, the kitchen is a shithole. You know, I thought you were going to fix it yesterday. I thought you said you'd clean up, but I guess, you know, women just do everything. And then I just start like going down this hill, you know, of I can't stop. I'm going down all these negative thoughts and everything's terrible. And next thing you know, I'm being cruel, you know, I'm being hateful. I'm just saying things, you know, obviously you don't love me, you know, just, it just sort of snowballs into this big, terrible thing. And that's how people with CPTSD ruin relationships. And I didn't want to do that again. I have a really nice husband. And I, you know, just luckily, it's in the times in my life when I've had the hardest time, and I've had some hard times, is when I got very serious about like reading the books, seeking mentorship, asking for help. But talk therapy wasn't one of the things that was helpful to me. There are a lot of people who benefit from it. A lot of people who come to my program are therapists for themselves or because they want to understand better. How does this work? It's the dysregulation piece they didn't understand. So if you look at people's brains who had a traumatic childhood, if you do an MRI, like on an adult who had a traumatic childhood, and you say, here, think about something stressful, and they do that, you start to see these changes that aren't the same as other people. So somebody else, if you think of something stressful, if they didn't have a traumatic childhood, over here, you get activity for, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. And over here, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. But with PTSD, this goes, activity stops, and it all goes over here in the emotional side. And that's what it feels like, I think, to get really triggered and dysregulated. I feel, but I'm not really thinking straight. I can't quite perceive reality very well. And that's complicated by some stuff that happened. You know, my mom, I'm using my mom as the example. She was a drinker and she drove drunk all the time. And when I was about 12, I started to realize she was drunk. I knew that what it was, and I was scared to get in the car. And I go, I don't know if I should get in the car. It seems like maybe it's not safe. And she go, oh, Anna Marie, stop it. You're being such a worrywart. You know, it's fine. And that kind of thing. And always having this sort of pressure to go into denial about my own perceptions. So then now I'm twice screwed. I can't perceive reality. So I would get myself in as a young adult. I would just get into really dangerous situations and not really understand how I got there. I wouldn't be able to read the red flags. Or I'd get together with some guy and later realize not good, you know, not good. And then, but that abandonment wound that I had made it really hard for me to leave, even when I hated the relationship, even when I couldn't stand the person.
Yeah, but that's why they call it complex, because it
Yeah.
is really complex and it really affects our relationships. Emotional neglect, could that be, could that turn into CTP?
Yeah, CPTSD.
Yeah.
It can, and it's funny because it's not funny, but you know what I mean. I used to assume that physical abuse and sexual abuse had to be like the very worst things that can happen, and they're terrible, of course. But in terms of developing CPTSD, emotional neglect seems to be the biggest culprit.
Wow.
And it may have something to do with the way your brain handles things. But that neglect, if you were getting neglected as a baby, and you know, we all have heard the studies of the little monkey baby and the wire mother who held the baby and the baby died, because you have to be touched and loved, and not just that, but you need to be responded to. So it's so natural when a parent holds a baby and the baby goes and the parent goes at them, and they smile at each other and they mirror each other, and they're building mirror neurons, and they're co-regulating their nervous systems. There's so many things we're doing with wisdom we don't know we have. And so if the parent is absent and the baby's just lying there in a crib, or it's going from person to person to person, and it's not getting that reflection, then the brain development is held back.
Wow.
And that's how we're navigating. And one of the things that intrigues me is the way, now autism is a totally different phenomenon, but there are some common symptoms in that it's very hard to read other people. So if you don't have those mirror neurons working for you, where even on Zoom, I can look at you and I can understand a little bit about how you feel, but CPTSD inhibits that, especially under stress. So it often, for what's so fun about doing this on YouTube, is like thousands of people come and they're like, I have that too. And now we know, like, there's nothing wrong with us. We have a normal injury from something abnormal that happened to us, and we're learning to heal it. But this feeling like I didn't get the memo, like everybody else goes to the birthday party and they know when to say thank you and they know how expensive a gift you're supposed to bring, but I just never know. I don't know. And I don't know what you're supposed to say. And then I say the wrong thing. And I always feel like nobody told me this stuff, but it's not only that they didn't tell me, it's that my brain was delayed in developing that, like reading other people and understanding, or walking into a room and, you know, when everybody's very sad and you come in and you're like, hey, everybody, you know, you don't feel it right away. And so part of healing is you become sensitive again to like, what's going on here? You know, how's everybody feeling?
But it seems like this can be the case for a lot of people having this, because emotional neglect, I mean, I imagine that so many people have experienced that, of course, to different degrees, but it's really hard for a parent to be present at all times. That's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
And even we can't even remember a lot of it because it's in our subconsciousness. And that's why I think many are wondering, do I have this or not? And I don't want to blame my parents. What would you say to those? Is it good nevertheless to, you know, seek out this information and maybe start the healing, even though you don't know exactly if you are in that category?
I think it's, yeah, you know, here's what I know about, like, I'm not a therapist, but I read literature from therapists and clinicians and doctors. And one thing we know is that the diagnosis of mental health disorders, or CPTSD isn't even recognized in the United States. It might be in your country, but it's not here. And they're thinking about recognizing it. And they're trying to decide whether to lump it under regular PTSD or borderline personality disorder or something. And those of us who feel that we have it don't even care what they think. It doesn't matter what they think, because what they think has no bearing on anything, really. I think it affects whether our insurance will cover visits to therapists. And some people with CPTSD have therapists who get it, but very few therapists know what this is. They're still doing it the old way, where, you know, in our country, you get 10 visits on your insurance if you have insurance. You go 10 times, you talk about your trauma. If you're like me, and I'm a very highly functional person, I run a big company, you know, I work hard, I have kids, I'm functional. But if you get me talking about my trauma for a straight hour, I'll be crying and I'll be a mess and I can't think and I won't be able to work for the rest of the day. And if you do that to me 10 weeks in a row, I will seem like somebody who's really screwed up. What they do then is they send you off for medication. Well, medication is not well targeted. It works on some things, but it doesn't work for this, evidently, from what I read. There's no evidence that antidepressants help with dysregulation. What does help with dysregulation are things we can do ourselves.
Yeah, I want to go into that. And before that, I want to speak more about the symptoms, because it especially affects our relationships. And I think I saw a video you had the other day about trauma bonding, like that why do we often go back to the person that is not good for us? And I've recently started looking into these attachment styles. And I've discovered from some sources, they say we have 4 attachment styles, like anxiety attachment styles, or disoriented, and safe, of course, and anxious. And these comes from, you know, abandonment issues, like just like you had. And I think I've had that myself, like fear of a rejection, because I saw that in my past relationships, even though it was over, he wasn't good for me, and I even broke up, I couldn't let go at all. And it made no sense to my mind. Like, why am I not letting go? So I'd love for you to share a little bit about trauma bonding and what's happening here.
Yeah, trauma bonding, I sure have experienced it too. And it's another thing where when I had a word for it, just even knowing the word for it helps so much, because then you can sort of go, oh, this is a thing. I'm not crazy. I'm not a bad person. I'm having a thing and other people have it. And it's a known thing and we know what causes it. And what it is it's also called intermittent reinforcement. And it's a technique used by, black ops spy people. You can really manipulate and control even a healthy minded person by giving them alternating, you're so great, you're so wonderful, you're terrible, I abandon you, you're so great. And so a person could intentionally manipulate another person this way. I think mostly when it happens, it's not intentionally inflicted. It's just how traumatized people interact sometimes, because what's happening is their need to flee is switching on. So they pack their suitcase, they run away, they say, I'm never coming back. And then their attachment wound hurts again and they come running back and go, please, baby, forgive me. It's the pattern you see in violent relationships. So it seems like most people and animals are vulnerable to this, that if you abuse a dog and then you're really nice to it, back and forth, the dog will develop trauma bonding symptoms too. And it will just beg you for your love and it won't leave. And so it's this terrible kind of glitch in our beings where we will attach harder to people who treat us badly, but if they alternate it with good, bad, good, bad.
Wow.
It's
So the
like,
trauma can actually happen, even though you weren't traumatized before, you can actually create a new trauma in that relationship.
yeah,
So,
yeah. But I think people who were traumatized as kids are primed for it. And, my mom's Norwegian, by the way. I know
oh,
in yeah, and my dad's Swedish. They were born here, but all my grandparents are from Scandinavia. So I have a lot of affinity there. But one thing I know is, like, my parents were both alcoholic, and that's not uncommon in Scandinavia. There's something in the gene pool or something where alcoholism is common. So what happens with an alcoholic parent is they sober up, or they're kind of like nice drunks, and they're like, oh, honey, I'm going to help you with everything. I love you so much. I'm sorry I wasn't there, after school, and I'm here now. I'm going to do everything for you. Their remorse drives them to be over the top love bombing. And then they're drunk again and they can't give love. They can't pay attention. And then they try again. Now, that might be a perfectly good person struggling with the disease of alcoholism and doing their best. They're not intentionally trying to harm the kid, but that's the result. It's like Mossad or CIA, trying to mess with a prisoner and get them to feel allegiance with somebody they shouldn't normally ally with. So it's a psychological trick that happens. And it's very hard to get out of that alone. And that's the thing about any kind of abuse, emotional abuse, or there are also relationships like people don't want to talk about, but some abusive relationships are mutually abusive. And so, but it's really hard because when people are in that, we want to, like, the outsiders and the people experiencing it, they want to see it as there's a bad guy and a good guy. But the thing about being the good guy in that is that until you can see that there's a role you're playing in being in this situation, you have no power. And so in a way, I feel like that rhetoric about, like, oh, the woman is always the victim and stuff, it's disempowering, because it's like, the woman is going through trauma bonding right now. And it's often men too who are abused, but the person who's being abused, their power begins when they can go, I've got to find one little place where I can make a choice differently here. And I'm having difficulty, finding my choices or feeling them or doing anything with them. But that's why, and it drives you to secrecy. There's so much shame in being in an abusive relationship. And so, like, so many of us are trying to, like, run around looking like everything's okay. And I was in an emotionally abusive relationship. My parents were physically abusive, and thankfully that's not something that I did, but I was in emotionally abusive relationships. And in the past, I had relationships with people who were active drug addicts, which is a very inherently emotionally abusive situation. So I was very busy hiding from the world, like, this is how bad it is at home. I'm so ashamed of myself. What's a nice girl like me doing in this? But when you're hiding what's really going on, you have no connection to anybody. Soon you just, like, shut down altogether. It was like being a doll or something, a little sad robot walking around, always lying about who I was and what was going on. So when things got really bad and I really needed help, it was a big jump for me to get where I could actually say, this is what's been going on in my life. I really need some help. I don't know how to get out. I want to get out. I don't know how. Abusive relationships so often cause money problems, where the person who wants to get out is financially strapped, they're stuck. There's so many problems. So there's two things in my approach. There's two things I'm teaching all the time, and it's about how to re-regulate your brain. Because when you have a regulated brain, you do have your choices appear. They come online. It's like you switch something on. Now you have choices. When you're dysregulated, you're at the mercy of what's happening. It just feels like you're drowning. When people go, why don't you just date nice guys? You're just like, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what you're saying, or why don't you get a better job? Or why don't you, exercise or go to
You
bed
just
early?
gotta let go.
Yeah, breathe. I remember I used to just go, I'm fucking breathing or I'd be dead, Like, believe me, I breathe.
Yeah, I remember when I was in a bad relationship, 10 years or something. When I left him, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Like, he was in my mind constantly. I thought I was going mad. And is that also like a symptom or a brain thing, that you just are obsessing about him, even though you're done in one
It
way?
seems like it. And I don't know if the science is so strong there yet, but I'll tell you that my observation is from my own experience. And then on my YouTube channel, there's a lot, I've been making videos. It's called Limerence. Limerence is the word for when you have like this obsessive infatuation with somebody and you're not really with them. Maybe you don't even know them. It could be a movie star. It could be an ex. It could be somebody you work with or somebody you see in a cafe, but you're not really with them. Because if you actually were with somebody day in and day out and, like putting down the toilet seat and all that with them, the limerence would go away and you'd be down in like the real life concerns of relationships. But limerence, it's like this fantasy state, this ideal love in your mind that you can hold for somebody who you're not really with. And it's miserable. It's a sad, empty existence, and it can go on for years. And one of the characteristics to ask yourself is this limerence is, are you looking for signs, hidden clues in their communication? Like when they post something on Facebook, are you looking to read between the lines? Is there a message coded for you that's trying to tell you that they still love you? That's how you know.
All right.
That's how you know. That's what it is. And it's funny how many people go, yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they share a song on social media or something, and you're like, the lyrics of that, they're trying to tell me a secret message that they feel the same way, even though they're with their wife and they.
Yeah. It took me a long time, but all of a sudden it just let go of itself. And sometimes I feel like we're just getting help from something that it just finally let go. And I didn't do anything for it, but I spent a lot of time. That word, ruminating about it.
Well, that's it. And I think that kind of like obsessive love, first of all, it can come in if you were primed as a child by emotional neglect to, I call it spackling. I don't know what the word is in Norwegian, but that stuff you put, if there's a nail hole in the wall and you put it over before you paint, you fill in that stuff. What's it called in Norwegian?
Sparkle.
Sparkle. Okay.
Sparkle.
Yeah. Same thing. And you fill in the hole. So your parent isn't loving to you, but you fill it in your mind. You get so good. So I call that crap fitting. You fit yourself to crap. Somebody doesn't give you love back, but you're like, that's okay, because I can imagine the love. I can imagine the love, and it's so grand, and it's going to be so great in the future. And I know that's how it is. But the reality of having an obsession like that is you're living like a ghost. You're not having real relationships. You're just escaping reality. You might as well be doing drugs. It's a very harsh drug that takes everything away from you, just like any other serious drug.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's been taken very seriously. So since I've been talking about that, like thousands of people have written to me and said, I have that. And so here's what I know about getting over it. You might have a predisposition from when you were a child. It'll tend to come up when your life feels empty. And that often happens at the end of a relationship, because you were always hanging out with this one person, and you had a lot of hope there. And then when that's gone, all the usual heartache, but also like, now who are you? Now what are your plans? And if you don't have any hobbies without them, you don't have friends, you're vulnerable, and it can come in and take over, and it can get really bad. It's called erotomania, when somebody gets it so bad that they're just like totally delusional that they're in a relationship with Johnny Depp or something.
Um, let's talk about dysregulation. When do we know that, oh, I'm dysregulated now? And I would love also to go into if you could give some advice on what to do in the moment.
Yes, yes. So dysregulation isn't always something I wanted to tell you about. Dysregulation is there's a lot of levels of it. You can't feel, and it does things like interrupts good blood flow. So if you have an injury when you're traumatized, it can be hard to heal your tissue because the blood can't get there, and it can cause infection. It can cause pain, chronic pain. There's all these things that you're not consciously in control of, but if you have a lot of like mystery medical symptoms and the doctors are like, I don't know this, and it's been going on a long time, it's time to consider the fact that it could be trauma happening. It's like if your trauma has nowhere to go, it will sometimes just settle in your spine or your nerves. People get fibromyalgia, or so it's not in your mind, it is real, but your body's having trouble coping with it and getting rid of it and getting free of it like we normally would with illnesses and infections, because trauma, it's just kind of like a poison, it's like a toxin, and we can't quite do it. And so it'll feel like miraculous healing sometimes when you get re-regulated. You can re-regulate the parts you know about, like calming. I'll tell you about re-regulation in a minute. There's things you can do, and sometimes that has a good effect on the things that you're not aware of, like how much, like, are your capillaries fully open? Who knows? You don't know. So, but you'll know because your body starts healing and your pain starts going down. So dysregulation, the signs that you can detect are things like you feel over emotional about things. You get easily triggered in situations. A lot of people get triggered in social situations, maybe when they participate in a group, or maybe when they talk to somebody who they don't like. And that would be, let's say somebody yells at you when you go to buy carrots at the store, and somebody yells at you that you did it wrong. Well, somebody with CPTSD can get their heart races, and they start to feel bad about themselves. And next thing you know, they're feeling like life can't go on. That's a trigger at work. So some trigger gets set off into a whole PTSD reaction, but that's happening in the nervous system. And another sign is numbness. This is a lucky one. I get numb in my nose and in my hands when dysregulation's coming on. And that's a really good sign, because when I feel that, I know that whatever I'm doing, and it's usually I'm about to have an argument, or this is a funny one, I get this sometimes when I'm getting my hair cut. It's just the littlest thing, but getting a haircut is a trigger for me. And I can't really tell you why. I think it has to do with fear that they're going to mess it up and I'll be stuck like that. I don't know. It's not so serious, but I'll get numb, and then I can't pay. And then I used to, in therapy visits, I would come out. I used to have to write a check at the end of the visit, and I couldn't use my hands. I couldn't even hold a pen. And I'd have to do like 5 different copies of the check, and I couldn't remember where does the date go and how do I do this. And I was so dysregulated from talking. So you can also tell sometimes if you're in the middle of talking and you can't remember what you were saying, and people laugh and they say, oh, it's just because I'm getting old. But that's not always what it is. It's a dissociation. So dissociation that's a sort of a slightly stronger word than dysregulation. And I don't use that word anymore, because dissociation can mean things like where you completely don't remember who you are. It's a very strong state, but it has a minor, it's a continuum. You get very spaced out. And so a lot of us do that all the time. You get spaced out, you can't really listen, or you're trying to read a book and you read the same paragraph over and over and over again. Or for me, when my kids were young and they were like, we would be riding a train and standing up, and I would be holding my little toddler son's hand, and he was crying. I remember this. And I had a backpack on, and I was resentful that nobody would give me a seat or help me out. He was like throwing himself on the ground and screaming, and I was yanking him up. And then I leaned over, and all my hair went in my face. And then my backpack came over the top of me, and I just felt enraged. Like my hair, my backpack, all of it. It just was so much rage. and I was in a public situation, I was able to control that feeling. But that's the kind of feeling that drives people to do something crazy.
Okay.
And a piece of it was just that there was hair in my eyes and I just didn't have hands, and I just, that's dysregulation, just total frustration.
And then
cut
you
my hair very short. Maybe that's why I hate haircutters.
And then you're talking about that there are brain exercises we can
Yes.
do. So, but it's still, you're talking about the brain and also the nervous system.
Well, the brain is part of your nervous system.
Okay.
They're one thing.
Okay.
But we say brain, and brain, we think of the brain as like where we have conscious thoughts. So that's helpful. It's helpful to say that, but it's part, it gets dysregulated too. So when you know you're dysregulated, and the first thing to do is emergency measures. So it would be like, I'm on a train, I'm with a little boy, I'm not going to smack my child, I'm not going to make a scene. And like we were laughing at breathe, but this is when it's time to breathe. And so I have a little gesture I do for myself when I know I'm dysregulated, and it's this. When I say things while dysregulated, it's sort of like a mean drunk person saying things, like don't say anything. Because the thoughts and beliefs I'm having, like people are assholes, they won't even give me a seat. And you know why that is? It's because they're, you know, my mind is like going into this big story about the situation. And if I voice that, I'm going to create problems for myself. It solves nothing. It's not going to help me cope with my immediate situation. It's going to make everything worse. Or the biggest area with my husband, if I feel that way, I start getting dysregulated. I get this feeling of urgency, like I've got to tell him right now, you know, right now how I feel about the kitchen and what he said and what versus what he did. I got to tell him right now. And I remind myself, if it feels like like urgent, I'm going to really stop. And I go into another room and I take out paper and a pen. This is my fairy pencil, actually. If you've ever seen it on YouTube, I make notes on the letters people write me with this fairy pencil. and I have a technique, a writing technique. So I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. But the very quick things you can do is you need to give your nervous system just a little push, a little jolt. You could do that. You could put some lemon in your mouth. You could put your hands in cold water or hot water. And I like washing my hands with soap. It feels nice and I'm touching my hands. Because what's happening with dysregulation is I'm basically kind of floating out of my body. I can't remember where I am. I'm kind of going off into some feeling world and I'm not in touch. Like what's going on around me? Am I safe? How am I affecting other people? You know, what's going on? What's appropriate? What do I need to say? What will I feel good about tomorrow? All of that is like not accessible to you. So I take time. You can wash your hands if it's very bad. Like for people who feel like they're going to hurt themselves, you take a cold shower. A cold shower just kind of makes you go, oh, and you're back. You come back into your body real fast. You can also, like I'm sitting in a chair right now and you can go, I'm sitting on my butt. You can take your feet. This is really helpful if you focus on your left side and your right side, because there's some trouble. Your brain's having trouble processing left and right and bringing them together. That's what looping is. And you go left and you pound your left foot on the ground, left, right, left, right. That can help a lot. You say it out loud. Isn't that interesting that that's what people who have been in a war do? They're soldiers, left, right, left, right. And what's interesting is that the things that help also, they tend to be amplified if you do them together with other people. And I find that interesting. My theory is that complex PTSD at its base is an injury to our ability to connect with other people. I suspect we have our own nervous system, but we're also part of one great big nervous system. And that we have no communication with that big nervous system. And that's why it's so lonely and so, you know, it's very sad and difficult to understand people. And there's a lot of frustration and anger, like as if we're trapped in a paper bag or something. So when you do things with other people, like dance or sing, everybody's singing one song together, it helps everybody re-regulate. Or when a mom is holding a baby to her skin, the baby is re-regulating. So when people say, what does it feel like to be dysregulated? I go, well, think of a newborn baby how when they start crying and their bodies get very rigid and they turn red and they're like, ah, ah, ah. And then they get held, maybe they get a boob in their mouth, and they calm down, and then they are re-regulating, and they're re-regulating on the mom's nervous system right there. And what a nice thing. So the big tool that I use, I have those little emergency ones with water. You can also like push your back into a corner. It's like a little hug. Sometimes you need to be squeezed, or you need blankets over your head. You just need to be like in the womb a little bit, just get the stimulation down so you can come back. Exercise, going outside and seeing the sun and the position, like, where am I? Where am I? The sun is over here, it's setting over there. I feel it. I feel the breeze coming from over here. So you begin to feel yourself outside. That's something you can do. The big investment I make is in writing. I write my fears and resentments. And this was crucial science for me, I got to get back to my microphone here. When you talk about your trauma, it goes through the triggers and triggers them. You can write about your trauma and not trigger them. And you can keep your mind calm as you write what happened. So I use this specific technique. I teach it in a free course. I'll give you a link you can share with everybody. I call it the daily practice. And it's writing fears and resentments on paper and then asking for them to be removed. Then followed by a very simple meditation of just rest, where, I don't know, you repair, your brain heals itself, and everything gets a little easier after that. And I do that twice a day. And that's made all the difference.
Wow.
They used to laugh at me, and now they're asking me to come train them at their hospitals.
Wow.
Yeah,
that was interesting that you said that when we talk about traumas, it can become bigger, but when we write about it, it's a different thing. I'm wondering about, what we focus on becomes bigger. That's sort of a spiritual teaching that many teachers talk about. What if we write, I fear this, I resent this person, I resent this. Can it get bigger?
Well, I think, a lot of people ask that, am I manifesting these bad things by writing about them? But that's why, if anybody wants to try what I do, take the free course. It's a specific technique where you're not like trying to bring bad things out from nowhere. You're just writing what's already on your mind, what you're already thinking about. So it's already manifested in that you're thinking about it right now. And then you get it on paper so you can stop thinking about it. But if it's there, like if I'm sitting there going, I have fear, I'm so fat, and fear everybody can see, and fear I have nothing to wear, like that self-hatred has manifested. It's already there. And I put it on paper. And then at the end, I write it's essentially a prayer. I ask for it to be removed. I teach people some different formats you can use so it fits your own belief system. You can release it. If you're somebody who's good at that, I'm not very good at releasing. I'm not very good at it. This got a lot easier for me when my friend just said, just assume there is a healing power out there and it will take it from you, and just trust it. It'll take it from you. And if there's anything that you really do need to think about or be afraid of, you'll know. So I just went, okay, all right, let's do that. And it's just worked marvelously well. Beautiful. I don't know why, but it does.
Yeah. So what is the feedback from people in your course? And
well, there's a few people, there's some people who this is not their jam. I'll just first say that they want to go to, they have other things that work better, like physical body things, yoga, movement, and that's more what they want to focus on. All these things are good. But for people like me, where I'm a very languagey person, you might be too, because you're a podcaster, that you process your reality through words. And so when you're stressed, it's coming out as thoughts with words, and you can actually name those thoughts. Well, I have fear I'm no good. I have fear I'm going to be alone forever. And so what we've called that sometimes is languaging it out. We're just languaging it out. And it's not that it never comes back. Like the fear that I'm not pretty enough will probably come back, as long as I live. I don't really care. But I don't take it very seriously, because I've written it so many times and asked for it to be removed. And then I forget about it long enough to just have a day, Right. I'm 59 years old. It'd be terrible if I was like, I'm way too ashamed to ever appear on YouTube. And I was like, well, there it is. There's my neck, everybody. It's getting kind of old.
Yeah.
And I just have so much more peace with what is, because all that fear that's a bad thing. And that's the least of, when you go on YouTube and you tell them about bad things that happen and bad things that you did and to hurt other people, you're going to get, there's people who are going to be mean sometimes. That happens sometimes. They say mean things. And so part of my growth has been to just keep bringing my dream, my calling. I've been doing this since I was a little kid. I learned these techniques when I was about 30, and I've been teaching people this whole time. I just have this passion, like I want to show you this thing. It helps so much. And then when I watch people experience the technique, so they write to me, and on YouTube, it ranges from everything from, from like, well, this is helpful. This is a nice tool for my tool belt, to, oh my God, I just like, for the first time in my life, I just realized I could put down all this like anger I have about stuff and just kind of be here now. So it runs the range. When I started doing it, I had very bad PTSD. I had a head injury at the time, and it saved my life. I was feeling like I couldn't go on, and this incredible woman, I didn't even know her. I barely knew her, but I decided to tell her I'm thinking of ending my life. And she said, oh, I felt that way. Come on in. And she lived in this warehouse. She was really cool. She had tattoos, She goes, here, have a cup of tea. She goes, I felt that way. Do you want to try what I did when I felt that way? And I was like, I guess it couldn't hurt. And she showed me how to write my fears and resentments. And she's continued. She's in AA. I'm not in AA, but she's helped thousands of people to get sober, showing them how to use this technique to, just let it out. Let it out. You don't have to, she tells them, you don't have to drink. You don't have to kill yourself. Like, you will get enough comfort and ease from doing this. And she told me that night. And I put my faith in the process enough to do it. And then later I read to her what I wrote, which is a nice part too, if you have somebody who you can read it to. And she was like, honey, I totally understand. I know that's what we're like, right? And we kind of laughed and we were lighthearted about it. And I cried but it just sort of moved down the conveyor belt. The story of my life moved forward. I stopped being completely stuck in these stories and feelings and experiences and opinions. I kept getting more of them, because I'm alive. I kept making mistakes. I kept getting my heart broken. I kept getting angry, but I always had somewhere I could just keep kind of rinsing it out. This river was flowing through me and carrying it along. And so it's not the same as insisting everything's great. It's not saying we don't care about the bad things. We're just like facing it. We're just naming it, facing it, writing it down, and, letting it pass on by. And if it comes the next day, well, that's the collective conscience too. That anger at other people, it's always going to come. But what are you going to, do you have a way to just keep it moving? Within 2 weeks after I learned it, I recovered a great deal from what I now know was bad PTSD brain injury stuff, where at the time I couldn't read more than a paragraph. I couldn't use a phone. I was about to get fired at my job because I was saying really like angry, inappropriate things. And I'd been attacked on the street. That's what had happened. But I was just saying weird stuff. And then I was using this technique, and I just like my whole like emotional state just came back right into my body, and just like, okay. And I was sad about some stuff. My mom had just died. I lost a boyfriend I really loved. I was sad, but I was not crazy. And I was able to start moving forward with stuff. And within a year, I got into one of the best grad schools there is. I don't know why. I've never used the degree, but it was impressive that I got in. And then, just one thing after another, when I learned to re-regulate my brain, and that I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but I was getting re-regulated, and my life moved forward really quickly, like stuff that I had been stuck on forever, all this, very quickly. I was moving forward because I could pay attention. I was in my body, like that's everything, right? And I was getting some support from this woman who was teaching me stuff like about just like good behavior, like what does a good person do? I was really selfish when I was dysregulated. And I think it's understandable, but when you're in that much pain, you can't really think about other people's feelings. So it can seem very narcissistic.
Right.
So I was learning how to be considerate, how to, listen to other people, how to take turns,
And I love that you mentioned, it's not just easy peasy going on YouTube, speaking about your experiences, but you're doing it nevertheless. And like we mentioned, this is not, you're not a doctor, but you're out there with your experience. And I feel like we need more people like that, because we connect to you. We can identify with it if we have been going through with it. And you provide some tools that we can try. And like you say, it is for some and it's not for everyone. I don't think it's one healing method that is, I've gotten it, I think there are many healing methods. And if something hasn't worked out, we can try something else. And it's people like you who are really helping people, putting themselves out there. And like you're saying, it's a calling. And I'm just super grateful for that, because I know it's not a simple thing, just doing it. But sometimes I feel it's such a strong calling that perhaps you feel like you cannot not do it. That is really fulfilling. So thank you so much for your wonderful work, Anna. And I've been really excited about speaking to you today, because I want to create more awareness around this topic. I think it could be really helpful for more people, like, okay, maybe this is what I have, because awareness is everything. And then diving deeper is the next step. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Yannicka.
And
I'll give you a link to that free course, by the way.
Yes, do so. Yeah.
Share with
And
people
all the best with your work, and just keep going with it. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll be in London August 13th. If any Norwegians and other Scandinavians who listen are in the area, some are coming over.
Wonderful. Maybe we'll see you in Norway one day. You have a,
I almost came this summer. I almost came last summer, but the lockdown, I couldn't. And so I think next summer I'll be there. Wonderful. And there's a lot of people who use my techniques in Norway. So.
Wonderful. Including me. All right. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Right. And I'll leave the link to the free video course that Anna has. Much light from the US and Norway. Bye-bye.